Our City podcast. We're back with another episode where we have candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. And the operative word today, and always, is community. And it's been a buzzword for a long time. And when I think about things that connect our community, I cannot help but think of NBA Live 2005, probably my favorite game of all time. I don't know if you're a 2K guy or a live guy, but I remember a lot of battles with you with my fellow co-host Jeswin Thomas, who's on the pod right now. Jeswin, what do you recall about our epic battles back in the day?
I don't, honestly, when I'm thinking about it, we've played Live '05, we played NBA Street Volumes 1 and 2. I think we started ending with 2K11, right? When Jordan was on the cover and I had the GOAT of that game, Carmelo Anthony, just whooping everybody.
Yeah, Olympic all-time scorer before now it's KD, but
Hey, Hall of
Carmelo
Famer
Anthony,
now.
Hall of Famer. Man, he was an assassin, and that really just broke my heart just because he was from the Knicks, and then I could not do anything. I have never felt more frustrated playing a video game in my life. But when Jess would come to my house in my basement in the early 2000s and just whoop me with just Carmelo Anthony. I think he scored like 95 points.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason I bring that up is because basketball is a great unifier, I think, of all brown people. Like, you just start talking hoops, and I
Yeah.
love the bonds that our communities have, right? Like, we have things that bring us together. And so, Justin, if you had to think about all the things that connect us, whether it's genuine or not, like, what are some of the Indian things that bring us together?
Yeah, sports is such a big one. I'm still thinking about the MFL tournament that happens up here in Chicago every single year. Those big basketball Martha Southwest tournaments happening down in Texas and Oklahoma. But aside from sports, I think butt whooping stories are probably one thing that connects all of us. Those strict parents asking us, 95, where did the other five go? And getting a beating for no reason, or coming home late and making up stories. And it's trying to get away with things. I think the strict Indian immigrant parent vibes unify all of us. No matter where you're from, you could be from Kerala or elsewhere. It's just something that immigrant parents and us, it's something
Yeah,
that connects us.
man, I feel very convicted at this moment because yesterday I was talking to my son, trying to prep him for kindergarten, and I'm like, they're gonna actually take grades. You have to. I was telling him the scoring system of what A's, B's, C's, and D's. I'm like, A's, you got to get straight A's because if you get a B, and I just turned into my dad, and I'm like, if you get a B, that's not good. It's not good to get B's. And I'm just like
Oh
thinking in my
man.
head, I'm like, what am I talking about? What kind of parenting is this?
B is technically above average. You're in
Yes,
education right now, so you should be
that's
knowing the scoring system.
I mean, when I started to explain C's, I'm like, C's. They're like, whatever, right? I tried to explain it to him, but yeah, I think the cultural similarities that we all share, that we don't even bat an eye, that we all can really relate to, right? There's
Yeah.
relatability to all the things that connect us, and I think that's what makes us comfortable. Lets our guard down a little bit, and I think we can form relationships so much easier when there's relatability. I think that's common
Yeah.
across all people groups.
Mhm.
Um, and why is that so important? Because, the things that bond us together and we develop community, and community is so great, and it's a buzzword nowadays. And we talk about connected community. I think we've talked about it within this organization for years with the fundraisers and concerts and events that we used to do back in the day, even with this podcast. But there's a common thing that I hear from a lot of churches, a lot of ministries, a lot of businesses, even, right?
Mhm.
I want to connect community. I want to connect community. So that implies to me that it's broken. And
Yeah.
I think for real, it is broken. And there's been a lot of hurt and pain and areas that we can see across the country, specifically in America. When we talk about Indian churches or Indian community, that it is broken. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that as we open up this new series, or as we talk about this connector series, because there are some great people doing great work to connect our community. But I want to understand, why is it broken? So when we talk about a disconnected community, Jessamine, is that hyperbole or being way too just dramatic about it? Or do we really feel that there are things that are fragmented in our people and the groups that we socialize in?
Yeah, when I was even when we were listing out the ways that we're connected, I wonder if those ways are more superficial than we sort of give it
Yeah.
credit for. I think sometimes even within a church context, especially some of these churches that are more liturgical, claim a long history and tradition, dating back to the Apostle Thomas till now, and you really say, "Hey, we've been this denomination for generations. We love basketball, we love the food, we love, our parents, we understand those stories." But really, is there depth there that's there? Because I feel like the deeper ways that we've been hurt by community are more evident. I think, the first thing I always think about is just like the honor shame culture. I know, again, just we've talked about it in previous episodes, but whenever you go to your church or your community gathering, it's always like no one really has major problems. I mean, sure, there's some problems. I lost a job. I have this health issue. Sure, but we don't really get to those heart issues saying, like my dad struggles with alcoholism, or my sibling has a mental health issues. These are the sort of taboo topics that we really don't broach when we come to our quote unquote connected community, because it brings us a lot of shame. And so that's just one thing that comes to mind, but I don't know if other things are popping in your head.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we're so shameful about some things and we don't even go to some of these gatherings is because we know we're going to get the question, right? Hey, are you married yet? Or hey, are you going to pop out another kid? Or hey, when are you going to get the house? And all this kind of stuff, right? There's
Yeah.
expectations and there's statuses that come along with this. And I think part of that are cultural, right? There's part of these cultural things that we bring with us, the mentality from like the caste system and stuff that comes from the context that maybe our parents and prior generations have brought with them, that mentality. But then you also see this generational difference, right? There's, especially in church context, right? Especially in Indian churches and the ones that, I grew up in and people that I've talked to, you see this gap, right? Like there's differences of like, oh, the older generation won't let the younger generation do this. And then the younger
Yeah.
generation doesn't think the older generation understands them. There's this disconnect of, you don't understand me. You can't understand my identity because we're second gen, or we come from different worlds, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's one of those reasons where, hey, you know what, this isn't working out for me, so I'm going to dip, I'm going to leave, find
Mm.
something that I could be a little bit more related to. uh
Yeah. Yeah, and you start talking about, what else has disconnection led to. I mean, you kinda hit the nail on the head. Sometimes when I walk into some of these churches, especially more on, like, the Pentecostal side nowadays, you wonder what happened to everyone that's 30, 40, and, in those 2 decades, because it's literally everyone that's maybe 50, 60, and above, and then everyone that's 20 and below. But really that middle is missing, and I'm part of that problem, right? I've also in some senses left with some things that I've seen from the church. And at the same time, though, there's this real thirst and hunger that's forming for people to see a change. I'm seeing, some shifts toward English related services. You're seeing people potentially returning, new vibe of leadership. And there seems to be this tension and hunger and change happening at the same time you see this disconnect and the effects of that for a couple decades.
yeah, and I think there's encouraging signs that we see from these new churches, and especially in what we say are Indian churches, but they're becoming multi-ethnic and there's progressive programs. And I think I've even seen it within like the conferences too. When we,
Mhm.
from our denomination in a Pentecostal background, seeing some of the conferences that are really being intentional about talking about these topics, about vulnerability and honor and shame, and really tough topics, but then also even just how they cater to understanding worship styles and how do I engage the next generation. And they're doing it really well. And I commend all the people who are putting these things together. And so I love that we're starting to see there are aspects of our community that's broken, but then there's people doing things about it. And I absolutely love that, to see the connectors come into play, right?
Yeah.
Um, but this disconnect, I think, has really led us to a lot of different things, right? And it's really hurt us in so many ways. And it's sad to see because there's so many great things about our community, but when you start to leave and you see these broken places, it leads to painful places, right? And it's kind of sad. How have you seen that? How have you seen this disconnection and the results of the rubble that it leaves to
Yeah,
people?
I think the mentality, especially with a good amount of people that have left, let's say the ethnic church, is a real almost like I don't want to say hatred, but really just saying, I don't really care where that church goes. It's almost hopeless. You've kind of given up on
Yeah.
where you came from. And in some senses, you might think that it's better for that paradigm or that place to almost die because there's so much fruit coming outside of it. So
Yep.
why have a heart to maintain it? I think that's really a question and maybe a hard issue we should be exploring a little bit more. Is that right? Is that wrong? Should we be thinking like that or not? But that's where I've seen the most damage when I talk to, especially a lot of our peers.
Yeah. No, I think that's a huge one where there's this apathy about our culture. And then, I've seen it actually come back around too. Maybe that now that I'm a little bit older, and then once people get married and they have kids and they're like, wait a minute, I kind of miss the polypum. I don't know how to make it anymore. Who's going to make it for me? So,
Yeah.
like, how do I go back to get that? And then I think part of the residual effects of a broken community, sad to say, are people actually not only leaving the church, but leaving the faith, right? They leave the
Mhm.
church because of probably
Yeah.
legitimate issues, and then they leave the faith altogether. And I think this is cross cultural, to be honest. I don't think I'm just not speaking about Indian church. I have people in my small group from all sorts of ethnicities. And man, I hear some really sad stories about parents really seeking God for their kids who
Yeah.
once were great believers and really strong in the faith, but as they grew older, got disconnected from the church. And that's what happens when broken communities are there and things happen. It's bigger than just like, oh, you don't sing the songs that I want to sing.
Yeah.
It's wow, I'm walking away from the faith because of this disconnect. And that's
Yeah.
really sad to see. But I love that when we do this pod, we always talk about like, hey, there's things that are broken, but what does the Bible say about this? And like, what do we actually see in scripture? Because it's not all doom and gloom when we talk about broken communities. There's actually hope. And you and I were talking, and there's like these wonderful verses that I think everybody loves. And then we try to put it up on a pedestal and like memorize it or put it up on some kind of crafty signboard in my kitchen. But it's like Jeremiah 29:11. Like I know the plans that, all the stuff. Like, but I think we wanted to take some of these passages and understand the promises of God a little bit more closely. So for our pseudo inductive study today, I think we wanted to talk through a passage. So let's jump in for today. We actually wanted to read Jeremiah 29, the infamous verse. But we actually want to read some of the verses around it and kind of talk through why this relates to community so well. So let's actually read Jeremiah 29. We're actually going to read verses 10 through 14. So
Mhm.
I'll read it, Jess, and then we can start to talk through our observations, our interpretations, and our applications. So I'm going to read starting from verse 10. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile.
Mm,
Some
it's
real
good.
powerful verses there. Um, man, I almost want to just take a minute and soak it in. Um, this is really ironic because you and I were talking. We always like to plan this stuff before we record, and then you brought this up, and I was like, "Man, I just read this chapter literally yesterday." So I love when these kind of things work out.
Yeah.
Um, but let's talk through our observations. What do you see on face value when you start to read these verses? What comes to
Yeah.
mind?
You see Jeremiah 29:11 plastered everywhere. Graduation cards, weddings. It's probably in your house somewhere. But at the same time, whenever you say that verse, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, it's right before it is, hey, guess what? One of the plans I'm going to tell you about is for 70 years, you're going to be captive in Babylon. So before you take Jeremiah 29:11, ask yourselves, how was your captivity? Right? Before you start putting that somewhere, how was Babylon? And you just, I say that in jest, but at the same time, it just shows you sometimes we don't understand what that verse was there for. It's really God telling a people that I am about to exile you and you are going to go through a miserable experience for a lifetime, literally a lifetime, 70 years.
Yep.
And then after that, I know what I'm doing. I have some plans for you. And there is going to be a change that's coming here. So I really wanted to highlight, one of the observations is understanding not just the context, but understanding there is plans for hope, but that also implies that there is a reason for hopelessness.
Yeah, that's so huge. I love that. try to read the context around these verses. So scour your house, find all the little plaques, and start to just read the chapters around it and the verses around it. And context matters. And I think
Yeah.
the thing that jumps out at me, just observationally, on face value, the thing that jumps out at me is the word I. I will visit you. I will fulfill you. I know the plans I have for you. I will hear you. I will be found by you. There's such an emphasis on I and from the Lord, and like that he is at the center of all of these things. And a lot of times we try to make, I think about community and we started to talk about, man, there's broken community. People are searching for community. Why are people searching for community? It's because they want something. Like, I want community because I don't feel great in my context. It's always about me. And I read passages like this and it's like, whoa, what does God have to say about this? Because he's at the
Yeah.
center really of this passage. Um, I even love,
Good.
you talk about captivity. We bring up the context. If we scroll up and look up at the beginning of this, it talks about what they're doing in exile, and they're in this place, and what does God instruct them to do? And he tells them in verse 4, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. It's like
Mm,
saying have community in this broken place, live life, and be in relationship with each other. Man, that's a picture of community surrounded by brokenness and exile.
yeah.
It's absolutely bonkers.
And even as you're saying that community surrounded by that brokenness, you think about Jeremiah and who he is. Here's this prophet that is sent by God to really prophesy and try to turn people away from the wickedness, prophesying about what is about to come with this exile. And none of this is making sense to Jeremiah, and he's known as the weeping prophet. But
Mm.
you think about his life, right? For decades, he is saying this to the people of Israel and really to no avail. But he doesn't just dip out and say, you know what, I've given up on y'all people. Like, I told you what I told you, and bam, I'm out, right? Do with it what you will. But he perseveres and to the point where God even gives him a glimmer of hope that's coming beyond his lifetime. But that patience, right? That patience to strive with a broken community for decades is really embodied here by Jeremiah. And I think maybe that applies to some of us. And when we're thinking about the brokenness within our own communities.
Yeah. Like to even have a burden for these people, right? Like to have that kind of posture. I love that. So when we try to interpret what God is trying to say here, what do you think I mean, it seems kind of obvious of like, hey, be planted, stay, have some roots here. But what do you think it's saying and how do you interpret some of the verses in this passage?
Yeah. When I think about this this passage, it's I mean, you highlighted it very well, Joby. It's just this entire thing about being about God, about him and his sovereignty, is just shown so much in these verses. That interpretation of, a lot of us, I think, with broken communities are looking for change.
Yeah.
And it's almost some of our reactions to it. Some of us have clearly left. Some of us are striving within it. Some of us are kind of confused, like I want to help, but I'm not really part of it. I don't exactly know what my place is. But throughout all of it, I think really from that prayerful attitude that Jeremiah potentially took here, it's really investing in having a heart for a community, praying for it, but also understanding change might take a long time, but God is sovereignly doing something that we may or may not be able to see in all the ways that he's potentially working and trying to understand our place in it. I think you highlighted our place in it sometimes might be to be planted, sometimes might be to be in exile and look for the welfare of another place, but always having a heart patiently waiting for God to do what we cannot do.
Yeah, man, this kind of reminds me of my pastor talked about this amazing sermon. I need to find the link and send it out. But he talked about community, and this has been a topic I've loved over past 20 years, just doing all of this ministry stuff, right? And it's just been a buzzword sometimes. But as I've started to learn, people have this idea of community of like maybe it's this big audience or big gathering, a lot of followers. Now you talk about social media, it's like, oh, I've got all these subscribers, right? It's like, is that community? I think from a business product lens, sometimes the world defines it very differently. But what is it really at the heart of what God wants? I think the definition that God has and what we seek, sometimes we're seeking comfort, we're seeking attention, we're seeking just, I don't know, practical things about like, I need somebody to watch my kids in my neighborhood, like those kind of things. But what does it say here when I see what should we be seeking? Should we be seeking community or do we seek Him? Like, you will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you. Like, wow,
Yeah.
like maybe our priorities are completely wrong where we're trying to say, "Oh, I would love this." I think we have to seek the welfare of the city, as it even says in this passage,
Mhm.
but we should be seeking him, above everything else, right? I think which is such a practical lesson, right?
And even when we were talking about disconnection earlier, I think about a lot of the problems that we highlighted, whether it was, honor and shame and how it manifests itself in some of our communities, just generational differences, and maybe we wanted to culturally preserve what we had, and a second generation trying to culturally understand where we're at. None of that really talks about keeping God and his mission almost
Mm,
central to what everything is, right? We're keeping culture almost elevated above this aspect of, just like you said, seek me with all of your heart and you will find me.
yeah,
And maybe that was an element that was missing that's causing a lot of the reason why we're disconnected. Even if those changes are there, if two generations were earnestly seeking the Lord, I believe that the Holy Spirit would have found a way to bring about supernatural unity that can only exist through him. But maybe it's both generations not doing that fervently.
yeah. And I think we're starting to see that shift, right? As we started to talk about earlier, we're starting to see
Mhm.
this focus, and we're not getting hung up on all the cultural differences and the generational differences. We're trying to say, hey,
Yeah.
I want to seek the welfare of my city and who's in my city. It's all of these different people groups. It's all of these different cultural groups. It's different people who have different ideas, but I'm seeking the welfare of them, not just of my own comfort, but the welfare of my entire community. And I think
Yeah.
this outward focus is very gospel oriented, right? It's literally like the emulation of the gospel. So I love that this passage kind of gives us a direction almost of like, how do you restore our cities? How do you restore our communities? How do you gather communities to be whole again? It's by, following not just the plans and, oh God, you got plans for me. I want to know what they are. Well, he doesn't really tell us. He has the plans and he tells us a promise in here too, where it's not just a plan, it's a promise of if you seek me, you will find me. And I think maybe that's where the posture of our heart has to be. But it's
Yeah.
encouraging, right? Like we see
Yes.
this shift and there's people doing it. There's actually people. And I think I love seeing Gen Z just seeing this focus and just culturally, even I see all these like celebrities like trying to find their faith. And it's like, whoa, I haven't seen this before. I don't know where this is coming from. Is there true revival stemming like even in America? This is something that I think hasn't been seen before. And I think it's starting to stem from our generations, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, like, last component of this, when we talk about application, I think we started to talk about this. I love one application that probably coming out of this is really this series, too. I think
Mhm.
seeing connectors in our communities that are not even doing a traditional way. I love the church planting. I love the ministries that are sparking up. But there's also people who are connecting our communities and doing it in really unique ways, from content creation to businesses to just really reaching out and talking about some of the things that broke us, like vulnerability and asking great questions and having platforms to do this. I love the application that this next generation is doing. How have you seen it too? Like, how do you apply? Like, when you see this chapter, instead of just buying another plaque for your house, how do you apply this passage?
Yeah, I was gonna say we need to start buying plaques for Jeremiah 29:10 and
Yes,
then
exactly.
plastering that up somewhere. Um,
Right.
in terms of how we really start to apply this, I think, really I like the fact that, verse 10 ends with there's gonna be a set period of 70 years where this exile is gonna happen. And then after that, God is going to intervene in this new and miraculous way. And I can't help but feel like maybe for our community, this is where the shift is happening. Yeah, we've seen brokenness for decades, and that's caused some stuff within our generation and previous generation. But right now, there seems to be this tangible mood shift happening, heart postures changing from both generations. I think right now it's just a question of asking the application question of like, where am I in this? shift. Because on one side there are we have to give credit. I think where credit is due. I think the first generation very much embodied that people in exile. I think a lot of their prayers are coming to fruition now
Yeah.
in ways that they might not have expected it, but in ways that God is answering those prayers. At the same time, there are some of us that feel like we are exiled, right? We are out of this Indian church community. We are in Babylon or Persia or wherever else the exiles ended up with, and we're trying to figure out what is our place. How do we sort of navigate this, because we are seeing this tangible change. Some of us are going back, some of us are keeping our distance, maybe a little bit skeptically, and at the same time there's a third set of people where they're probably experiencing what God is actually doing within the community because they're still planted there. So maybe
Yeah.
we could dive into those three areas, Joby. It's almost like, what should we do with those three sets of people? Kind of the first generation and their prayers, our generation where some of us are outside of the Indian community, some of us are returning to the Indian community, and like that last generation where they're really plugged in and really driving on the forefront of that change.
Yeah, I love just kind of the segmentation out here. We think about the first generation prayers coming to fruition. There's this patience, there's this resilience, and then there's this never giving up type of attitude. Man, this is really convicting because I had someone talk to me about their son who was far away from the faith, and they even mentioned to me that like, I don't know if I'd ever live to see if he would ever come back to the faith again. And that really broke me where you know, what if I help take that mantle on of praying and maybe I continue to pray? Not that I am doing anything out of it, but like, how do we have that resilient attitude like our parents did and our grandparents did? Like, it's just amazing. I saw I saw my grandmother and my kids got to see their great grandmother in India just months ago, and like that was like a tangible example of this, right?
Yeah.
Prayers that I would never have really dreamt. It was just amazing to see her prayers because she prays for everybody by name and then she gets to hold them in their hand. It's like mind blowing, right? It's this tangible thing. How do we be resilient like our parents and that take the lessons of the prior generation and apply it practically in the daily prayer? Maybe those, you're really annoyed by every single weekend was taken up by prayer meetings, but like, man, there's components of that I miss. And that habit, that daily habit was so practical and vital. Maybe we need to resurrect some of those things back.
Well, it's probably one of the components that's missing from our generation that we
Mm,
need to reinstitute, right? If we were to take a survey of everyone listening to this podcast right now, how many of you are actually praying on a daily basis? I'd be curious to see those results.
yep.
And I don't think it would be, 75%. I think we might be below that threshold, which is concerning. At the same time, too, we talk about those prayer meetings we might have been annoyed by growing up. We don't really have those kind of gatherings as a norm in our generation. We're
Yeah.
very much on a more programmatic basis, right? We think about the small group, the church service, the outreach, the whatever else, but really setting aside just time, an elongated time of prayer is something that needs to be a pattern and needs to come back in our generation because there's no power without it. It's something that we talk about. I feel like we need to do both. We need to be out
Yeah.
there and doing things, but we also need to be praying. I think sometimes we think back and only see our parents praying, but then we're not really doing anything with that. And I think this generation has a chance to almost change the paradigm where we need to do things. But we also need to take that power from our prayers as well.
Yeah. And thinking about the generational gaps too, I think this is such a tough question for me to just even admit because now that I am old, like I've seen it from the younger generation always complaining about the older generation, never giving them a chance and all these kind of things. And there's this disconnect. But now you get both of these generations who are like, man, we see this exodus from our churches and this gap, and you can see it cross denominationally. And there's people who are leaving and then you got people who stay, and I've got great friends who stick it out and have been there for decades plus. Like, how do we actually continue to serve that gap, right? And I love even just for the podcast, just having the next generation, just to say, hey guys, we'll record, we'll edit, we'll do all this kind of stuff. Come and tell your story, share your story. We want to hear from
Yeah.
you. Like the opportunities that the older generation may not have given the younger generation now that we get older and now we see the mistakes, maybe we say, well, I don't want that to be me anymore. I don't want to have the spotlight. I want to make sure I see somebody doing amazing things. I love it when I see the next generation. Just like, how do we empower? How do we encourage?
Yeah.
How do we platform all the great work, because when they get to the age of like, now I got to have, a family, how do I impart that to the next generation? It's so important. So I think we have to learn from mistakes, and how do we actually encourage and uplift others, not giving ourselves a spotlight, but empower the next generation to run with the baton.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, I mean, we talk about that generational gap that's missing in some of our churches where people in the 20, 30, 40s are really not existent. Those should be the people actually empowering this next generation that's still at those churches driving that change. But a lot of us in some senses are missing. For those that stayed, like, thank God for y'all, right? Like, at the same, you can really make a huge impact there, and you've really strived the longest and patiently with the churches that you're at. But for a lot of us, including ourselves here, that are not necessarily part of an ethnic church, sometimes, I'd say almost two things. One is just the posture of our hearts, right? For those of us that are really have that anger from our church experience before, I almost see it as sad where we've kind of given up on the ethnic church altogether and the community not really thinking about change. Because I always think about Paul, right? I think we talk about Romans chapter 9, where Paul, being the missionary to the Gentile, that was his calling. But in Romans chapter 9, he says, I wish I could give up my salvation for
Yeah.
the sake of the Jews, right? Almost, saying like, I would take on hell just like Jesus did if my ethnic brothers and sisters could be saved, but I can't. And therefore, I am a missionary to the Gentiles. I think it's very powerful, because if we lose the heart for our ethnicity, it's almost like we've lost a heart for something that God gave us that's our immutable characteristic, right? If we're going to say every tribe, tongue, and nation is going to be there in heaven, then the question is, why did God make you your tribe, your tongue, and your nation here on earth?
Yep.
And I think if we don't have a heart for them, I just question, is that biblical? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if you have a reaction to that
That's
before we
a
get to the second group.
that's a tough one to answer, because I think there are legitimate reasons why we should be in multi-ethnic church. And then we're not saying that Indian church is bad or Indian church is the only way. It's like, that's nonsense, right?
Yeah,
Like, and I think some of those conversations get blown out of proportion. But
sure.
there's like seasons of life, and there's practical reasons why you are planted in where you are. But then I have so many conversations with people who are like, man, I'm debating, should I go to the Indian church? I really have a heart for a community, but I need the programs, I need the nursery, I need the structure for my kids. And there's like legitimate things, right? And I think
Yeah.
those are all good things, but there's avenues we can still use. Like, I love that we do this podcast and we're all part of multi-ethnic churches and serving multi-ethnic groups. And we've done so for years. But at the same time, we talk about our cultural things, and we have listeners and we engage with them because like they have shared stories. And then I love it when somebody says, man, I've never heard it this way. And that always blows my mind. And somebody just says, man, I never heard the gospel presented this way, or never heard you talk about the Holy Spirit so candidly about this, right? Like, there's some of these things, but we still want to give back to our community because we have shared experiences, because I can relate to you. And I think we
Yeah.
need, there's avenues. There's so much more now with content and media and the way the internet connects us together. There's no excuse not to go back. Go to a conference, go to PCNet,
Yeah.
go to like whatever, like go to those conferences, get involved, because you never know who you can reach because of the way God designed you, right?
100%. And I just wanted to echo that. I completely agree with that sentiment. It's more so for the fact of the people that are totally willing to just cut that off and completely be disconnected. It's
Yeah.
almost like God made you for a reason the way that you are. You have the ability to reach that demographic better than anyone else can. So think about how you can leverage that and almost have a heart like Paul did, even if you're in a multi-ethnic space, to think about your brothers and sisters in that regard. Because I agree with you, both of us are not going back, or at least I don't know if we are going to
Who
be
knows?
called to go
Never
back
say
to.
never.
Never say never. No, we never know. But at our current context, I don't think that's really something that I could see. But at the same time, I almost feel like a Nehemiah, right? We talk about his story where here's this dude, cupbearer to the Persian king. I think it was Xerxes, right? Don't quote me on that. But he is sitting there and he realizes the walls in Jerusalem, his ethnic home, is broken, and he decides, I'm going to go on a mission to go rebuild these walls. And the king's like, all right, bro, like, you can go however long you want, but are you coming back? And Nehemiah's like, yeah, I'm coming back, right? So you see him kind of go fulfill this mission and then return to his context, and he does this a couple times before he makes his final reforms and goes back. So it's not to say that, hey, for all of us that are maybe in multi-ethnic spaces, still have a heart for the Indian community, maybe we figure out, like Nehemiah did, what is the ways that we can influence change, but also not completely supplant ourselves from where we're at. Daniel's another person that comes to mind, right? Here's a dude that you see a story arc throughout all of Babylon, and it transcends human kingdoms, even getting into the Media Persian Empire. He has a heart for his people, but we never see him actually return from exile, even through his prayers and stuff. He remains where he is at while still having that heart and praying still for his people. So, and that call doesn't necessarily mean we're all going back. I think we all should have a heart for it. And depending on where that heart is right now, we pray through it. If we don't have a heart for it, hopefully we develop a heart for people that look like us. And at the same time, we figure out, like a Nehemiah, like a Daniel, if we're not called to go back, how do we still impact and influence change? And I think that's a really cool avenue to think through. And I think a lot of our connectors that we're going to be interviewing are doing that in a very good way.
Yeah, I love that. And for reference, King Artaxerxes the first
Mm.
was the king during Nehemiah's reign. So no emails, please. But I love that. I think just examining our heart, right? Like examine your heart and understand maybe some of the bitterness and maybe some of the things that drove you away from the community were not really because of the culture and the community itself. There's so many people that could probably get value from you, right? Because of who you are. And I think that's such a great lesson that you bring up, Jeswin. God designed us for a certain reason. So I love the series that we're coming up with. And I think the reason why community is so important is not because we just want to bring everybody back together and have a big old church again. That's not why, right? Like, why do we want to connect community? Why do we want to restore our cities? Like, why do we want to do this? Not to have a following, not to have a huge audience, but because it brings transformation, right? Like, it actually brings transformation when you have a unified people group. And when you see like a passage like we just read in Jeremiah 29, like he restores people together for his ultimate purpose. Like he brings
Yeah.
people back for his ultimate purpose. And you're starting to see that. And I love that this revival kind of feeling is happening in America where you see people coming back, people letting go of their pride and letting and empowering really the next generation to come back together. And
Yeah.
it's not just because of numbers, but it's because of transformation, right?
And like you said, right, that's our ultimate goal here, is that sense of revival, because you look at the community and our, especially our people, and you see this amazing potential, right? You see it played out throughout the world. We are, our people are leaders of everything from Microsoft to Google. We are in, leading the CIA right now. We're politicians, prime ministers. You see the absolute impact that we have on the culture, but spiritually, I feel like we're lacking so much. If we just got a revival amongst this community, I truly believe the welfare of this entire nation, if not the globe, is going to be impacted because of just how impactful we are in every other sphere.
Yeah. And the best way to do that is to seek him. And if
Yeah,
you seek him, you'll find him because the DNA of community is in the inherent design of the creator because
it is.
of the triune God of how he is community itself, right? Like he is such a relational being and how he designs us to be in community. It's
Yeah.
it's how do we find a successful community? We don't replicate some kind of social media following or content creators or mega churches or anything like that. It's by seeking him with our whole heart and I will be found by you. And it's more than just the plans, it's the promise, right? It's the promises
Yeah.
in these verses that we see.
Yeah.
Love it.
And just like we talked about before too, maybe we do feel like we were in that exile like season for such a long time, but just like you said, that promise, this might be the time of the fulfillment of that promise, and we have an inkling that that might be the case. So, for those of us that have been hurt by the community, that have left the community, that have almost given up on the community, like we echo those sentiments and we give a lot of credence to those feelings. At the same time, it just wondering, does God see the timeline of community just from our small vision that we have here? Because he knows the plans he has for us, and he knows the plans he has for this generation. We might have been in an exile for a couple decades, but if we take that to heart and his plans are about to be fulfilled, we're on the precipice of that. It is an exciting time to start being part of what God is about to do. And I'm just going to be sitting here waiting and just seeing how we're about to thrive for the future and how these connectors are going to enable our community to do that.
Yeah, I love that we're going to be hearing all the different creative ways from people in our community who are looking to connect those broken pieces together. And so, love this conversation, love this passage to dive through. What a great way to highlight how our communities can be ultimately restored. So, Jesswood, thank you for this conversation. Next time I see you in person, it is on site 2K, whatever, 25. Is that what the newest edition is out right now?
I don't even
Well,
know. I don't think I've touched an Xbox controller since we last played.
probably. Oh man, no, that gives me hope. But maybe I'll have I can bring back all these classic teams, bring back all the old days, right? The 95 Bulls, 96 Bulls. Um, great conversation. Looking forward to all the next episodes. So be on the lookout for some great interviews, and we will talk again soon. Thanks, guys.
Peace.